I see some stuff that could go to a fundraiser.
Yeah.
Garage sale.
Yeah, we're short one on town staff tonight. There's another young man.
Oh, sometimes the braid is here, yeah, sometimes. But we got the veteran right here.
No comment, Jim?
Tomorrow's the,
That was said in a positive way, by the way. I didn't mean that.
I was wondering, talking about the
We're
young
close in
man.
age, so what am I gonna say? Old time.
All right, take these along.
okay. Call the April 10th meeting of the Loxahatchee Groves Planning and Zoning meeting to order. We have roll call, please.
Chairman Lipp,
Present.
Vice Chair Crawford,
He'll be here sometime a little bit later. He's dropping off his son
Board Member Corning. Right here. Board Member Harris,
here.
alternate member Close.
Here.
And this one I missed, Grace Joyce, Board Member,
Here.
sorry,
It's okay.
and alternate member Burns Guillaume.
Okay, have a motion to approve the agenda. So moved by Veronica, second.
Second.
Second by Grace. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Let's consider the minutes now. Everybody have a chance to read the minutes and we'll have a motion to approve.
Sorry,
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Keith motions to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Veronica Close. All those in favor, all opposed, signify by saying yes or aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye, aye. Okay, old business, discussion of home occupation, home business, residential enterprises. Staff.
Well, I guess I'll start it off, Mr. Chair. We brought this to the, as you can see from the minutes, we brought this to the March 13th meeting. However, there were only 3 members of the committee here, and they did believe that it would be probably prudent to wait until we had more members of the Planning and Zoning Board. This item is broad. As you know, it's been before you in a couple different forms. And what had happened is Vice Mayor Gerald and the council had requested that you take a look at and talk about it one more time, with the impetus being these 2 codes that were here from Port St. Lucie and from Highlands County. So they are provided to you in your packet along with some of the relevant provisions of our code. And basically the town council is looking for your input as it relates to both of these codes and as it relates to our code. And if you can indulge Jim tried to make it a little bit easier and help you out tonight, and he has a small handout as well. Jim has kind of been in the thick of this with me as we've taken this through council, we've taken it through this body before, and we've had several discussions with the Unified Land Development Code Committee that we can also kind of update you on as we go through this discussion and deliberation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay, all right, well, I put together this short little 3-page handout. The reason I did that, and I apologize for the way it looks, but because I did it very quickly this afternoon, some handwritten stuff and some cut and paste stuff. But I think it sort of concisely puts everything that we need to talk about in a little package, and maybe we can talk from this rather than the backup that's in the agenda. And I really have 4 basic parts to this little handout. First is what I feel are the key definitions out of the ULDC that pertain to the issue. First, residential enterprise. Second, home occupation. Third, home office. And 4th, accessory use. Item number 2 at the bottom of the page is as an excerpt out of the AR district, which shows you that home offices and residential enterprise are permitted accessory uses in the AR district, subject to a list of conditions in Article 80 of the ULDC. And then item number 3 on the next page contains those conditions out of Article 80 for each of the 2 uses, home offices and residential enterprise. And on the last page, the council was interested in having us look at ordinances from Port St. Lucie and Highlands County that Councilman Gerald had provided earlier, with the objective of trying to determine whether or not there were any provisions in those codes that the P&Z board felt should be brought forward into our code. And without going through and writing down all of the provisions out of those 2 codes, I did highlight some of the key provisions out of those codes that sort of relate to the issues that the town council wants us to address. And if you can turn back to the first page, under the definitions, we have a fairly simple one-liner definition of residential enterprise, fairly simple definition of home occupation, and home office is a fairly detailed definition, and I think a lot of what's in that definition maybe should go in the conditions in section 8. I think they're conditions as opposed to definitions. I think the definition of home office could read as simply as an office designed for and operated as a business location within the confines of a dwelling unit, period. And then everything else are really more conditions under which a home office can operate as opposed to the definition.
Jim, could you hold your thought there for a second? I just want to have the record indicate that Burns Guillaume is now joining the meeting. Thank you.
Pass this down. And this is a little summary handout that we're going over right now.
Very good, thank you.
So that's one of the recommendations that I would have is that we make the definition of home office simpler and take what really are conditions and move them over to Article 8.
Chair recognizes Chris Jones.
I just have a question as to, well, 2 questions. The first is, where is the draft that we spent hours. I remember that meeting when we went back and forth. We left here, it was like 11 o'clock. And I know, myself and Veronica bring to the table 2 different municipalities' point of view, in addition to yours, Jim, on home occupation, residential enterprise, and home office. And it was painful for us to go through, but I think we were very thoughtful. I think, and I understand why we're back here again. I get that. What I don't understand is if what we as a volunteer board recommended to our town council, if there's something in there that we did not want to put in there, that they want to put in there, then they should put it in there. I think it's unfair to A, pay you to go through this all over again, and B, ask us to go back through and do this all over again. We've done this. I think it's a complete waste of our time. I think it's a waste of our tax dollars to now pay our consultant to go through this process all over again. And I would make a motion that what we recommended in whatever month it was, January, February, December, I can't even remember when, is the bottom line. That is what we're recommending to the town council. If they feel that there are things that we missed or things that they feel they wanna put in there, then they should go ahead and do it. I just don't think it's a good use, of our time. We're volunteers. You know, we spend a lot of time researching what we do before we get here. We don't take this position, no one in this room takes this position lightly. So I would ask that we not go through this all over again.
Okay,
I second her motion.
sure, a motion.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Let's open this up for discussion. Bert?
I'd like to know what additional information is being offered, or what the council's reasoning was behind A, not making the change that they want themselves, and B, sending it back to us.
Well, I can only surmise. I think that they were looking for some specific direction in terms of page 3.
Mhm.
Are there any of the items there? Because one of the council members went to, I guess, considerable amount of time doing some research, and he would like to get your opinion as to whether or not any of the provisions in other codes that he researched are appropriate to bring forward to our code. And I'm not sure that we did that in any of the other sessions.
Let me add something to that too, Jimmy,
Yeah.
when you're done.
Yeah.
I'll just say that the two codes you have before you here, we were also asked to take those to the Unified Land Development Code, which we did, committee, which we did. And that committee was drafted really to review our ULDC, not to start going into other codes from other cities, which is really more of a planning and zoning board function than the Unified Land Development Code. But nevertheless, we had a very constructive and long discussion that Jim and I participated in with that committee. And, you know, we offered some suggestions, and I think that our position was, number one, if you're going to change the code structurally, and now forget the gun dealer guy, we're not even referring to him at this point, we're just talking in general, that, you know, number one, you have to determine how you want to address home occupations. And the first question we asked them is, as a committee, do you feel the town should expand the home occupation to allow for additional professions, additional service providers, things of that nature? In which case, if they did, our suggestion was that you do it on a sliding scale based upon what home occupation might generate more activity, in which case there would be more conditions and that kind of thing, and then down to a simpler type of home occupation, like a business office, where you're just using internet and computer to do whatever you're doing. And I think the committee liked that to some extent. They didn't really want to get into discussing the other codes, even though we provided them. And the one thing they said, I think this is the key, the one thing the Unified Land Development Code Committee told us is that home occupations and residential enterprises and these types of uses should really address only service and professional uses and not uses that are dealing with commodities, which I thought was pretty insightful on their part. I think that's a good way to go if you're going to try to address this. I'm just bringing this out to you because that committee did discuss it, and that was their final recommendation to the town council, which is going to be enumerated in a summary report of their year activities. So I think what ended up happening is, the gentleman, the gun dealer, is very persistent. I guess he keeps, trying to get council to make an accommodation for his concern. And they had these ordinances, and they tasked staff with, once again, bringing it to you for any, input you have. So I guess, we don't need to rehash the whole issue, but I guess if I'm interpreting council correctly, what they're looking for is, as a board, do you see any merit in either this Port St. Lucie ordinance or this Highlands ordinance that would make you change any of the convictions you currently have had in the past? And it sounds like you're telling me no, so.
I do not.
Well, I think, if there is to be any further discussion at this board, I personally think that there's three items that you might want to consider. Number one is employees. Number two is sales of goods and services. And number three, customers.
Do we have the minutes from those meetings? Because we beat that horse dead. All three of those issues were talked about round and round and round, and I believe that we came to a decision.
You're correct.
We did. I don't think that there's any room, in my view, that would change my decision. And, coming from the amount of experience that sits in this room with land use and zoning, I think we talked about everything. I don't think we left any stone unturned. And I think we even tried to figure out a way to accommodate the gun salesperson. So, the town council has to step up to the plate and make their decision, in my view. That's what we elected them to do. So I don't feel that we should be, I think there are other things that we could do more productive with your time and Jim's time and the ULDC board's time and our time than to actually discuss this again. I really, and that's truly how I feel.
Okay.
Veronica.
No, we're not gonna keep it the same.
No.
Jim, you brought up three things: employees, sales of goods, and customers. I think this committee decided all three of those things were not appropriate to a home use, and I still am of that mind. Is there any more discussion, Mr. Chairman?
Well, let's, if we're done discussing this, my feelings on this is that, when Gerald brought up the Port St. Lucie and the Highlands, ordinances dealing with home occupation, it did shed a new light on it that we hadn't discussed yet. So it's something that, to accommodate the town council, I think it is appropriate that we, on that one question, is this Port St. Lucie ordinance, how would that fit, just as an example, into the town? And I think that's, if you don't think it's worthwhile, vote it down. If you do think it's worthwhile, we'll just, I went ahead and redlined, the Port St. Lucie ordinance,
I read it.
because the other one, I think, was just too, the Highlands was.
Actually, I think they were provided to.
Yeah, they were.
Yep.
Yeah.
They both were.
Yeah.
They were in the packet,
Mhm.
so I read it.
Um,
I made notes. I don't, thank you. Do you guys
Could you
want a
pass
copy?
it?
Sure will.
You pass that over to the secretary.
Where did this come from?
Port St. Lucie,
No, I mean, who did this?
I did.
Oh, you did.
So just basically, there's still some of those glitchy things that copying something from a poorly copied PDF anyway. But, basically, this from the Port St. Lucie ordinance, I think, covers things that would be what what I would see, just adding to the language along with, whatever suggestions Jim had. I think your suggestion of definitions go into section 80. No sales of product unless produced on the premises. I don't really see how that's happening, because I think we'll run into a conflict there. But we have a motion on the floor, and in deference to the motion maker, I think we ought to have an up and down vote on that.
Can I ask you a question about what you passed out?
Yeah.
So this would allow unlimited employees?
That's up for discussion. I don't think, I wouldn't like to use the word unlimited, but I think probably one employee.
I would again ask what happened, where are the recommendations that we made? Where's the language that we spent hours and hours creating as a part of this discussion? It's like we spent all of those hours discussing this as an advisory board, and now we're looking at Port St. Lucie and Highlands and everything, and new recommendations made by staff based on definitions, when we, I believe, came up with definitions and regulations based on what this board thought would be most beneficial to our community. So I just feel like all that work we put into it was completely disregarded. And, if that's the way the council is going to treat the work that we do, I'm not sure if I want to be a part of this board and spend all the time putting into that. It's not only in this room, it's at home researching all of the information that's in the packet. So, I'm frustrated right now.
As I recall, the time that we actually did the work is that this got postponed and postponed and postponed at the council level.
Yeah, well, it got pulled, it got defeated at one point, or at least they didn't, they moved, I think there was like 2 or 3 different attempts, if I remember correctly, throughout. Been going on for a long time, on and off.
Yeah. Keith?
Wasn't it in the September 12th minutes that we voted 5-0 to say no?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's, if there's no more discussion on Grace's motion, could you repeat your motion for us, Grace?
Yes, I make a motion that we, what did I say, that we not re-review this, or that our position on the home occupation remains the same as it was in the board meeting that we had. Was it September 12th? And I'm not,
I went through the minutes and I believe.
maybe if we could verify that?
It needs to be verified, I'm just going off of memory.
When I
It's
report
not
it
very
back,
good.
I'll get the appropriate
Thank
date
you.
and provide it.
Mr. Chairman, I think you have a second on that.
I was just seeing if there was any more.
No, I think that was it. Is that good, Mark?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
it. That was it.
You get the gist?
Okay. All right, all those in favor of this motion signify by saying aye. All those opposed, same sign. Aye. So it passes, I guess,
Mark voted?
You voted, yeah, just. for the
Okay,
record.
aye, okay.
passes 4-1.
No, I'm not against it, I'm in favor of,
No, I was against it.
oh, okay.
Thanks for the clarification, though, that helps.
Yeah. All right. But it would be good to, in the future, staff, when we're coming across issues like this, if it has been before us in the past, if you could stick that in the backup, that way we're we're not going off of,
Sure.
you know,
We'd be happy to. I mean, the only reason why we didn't do it in this particular case was because they were pretty specific that they really wanted comment relative to those two ordinances. And so Jim more or less tried to zero in on what those two ordinances contain, just to give you that input. But obviously, if they wanted you to come back and come up with a solution, we'd have to give you everything to, you know, and that's not what they were saying at this point. That wasn't.
Ball's in their court,
Yeah.
and it has been since September, so.
And may I make a recommendation? I noticed that our next two agenda items, we have the ordinances, but there's no backup whatsoever. And I realize that takes up some time, but I think it would be beneficial at least to just outline the issue, why it's there. I mean, I don't mean write a book, but just something to kind of frame it so we understand what we're looking at. That's possible.
okay, moving on to the next agenda item, staff?
Okay, we'll try to frame it right now.
Boy, that's gonna be interesting, I can't wait to hear this.
Well, as you are probably aware from, you know, your involvement in town matters, we have had an ordinance dealing with the regulation of manure in town. And in 2012, we made some changes to the ordinance, which at that time were all meant to toughen up the restrictions on haulers and bringing manure to the town and properties receiving it. Then in 2013, there were some farming interests who came in and asked council that they felt they needed to have more manure for banana plants and things like this, and so the town council actually loosened the requirements. And we started to see some problems occur, most primarily because we don't have enough staff to enforce, you know, that kind of ordinance, and there's a lot of regulation in it, as you can tell by reading it. So at the end of last year and then the start of this year, we started to receive more complaints than we ever had in the past. Folks getting alarmed, seeing a lot of manure trucks coming in, which they were, seeing manure haulers coming in after hours, violating the code requirements, and we were becoming very concerned. We also had an IGC meeting where we had some input by some of the staff of Wellington, and they kind of talked about the horror stories and the amount of money they spent trying to address the phosphorus issue that occurred because of manure issues in that municipality. And there was it was actually a receiver property that came in, and pretty much the council gave the town manager the authority to weigh and use discretion as it related to some of these permits. Well, this particular interest wanted 2 permits that, if you costed it out, would total $43,000 a permit, or almost $86,000, and I just wasn't prepared to waive something like that. And so staff went back to council and indicated, look, we have a problem, the problem is growing, it may end up seriously harming the town in terms of, you know, because Dr. Lauda had gotten up at a meeting and talked about how he's been doing his own, you know, personal testing and finding that, you know, what he's getting, the results he's getting are off the charts, you know. And so, you know, all these things are coming. And so what council this time took the position like, yeah, you know, you're right, we kind of let this get out of hand. So they tasked the town attorney and staff to come up with some solutions to these problems. The ordinance that you have before you tonight was drafted not by staff, but by the town attorney. So it is based upon the parameters that the council laid out. But I can tell you, we have had meetings with the state attorney's office. We have met with the Solid Waste Authority. We've met with the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office. We've been working in conjunction with the Environmental Crimes Unit of the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office. And I'm not so much talking about the ordinance right now, but I'm just talking about independent enforcement efforts. And we have succeeded in slowing down the amount of manure that's coming in. One of the provisions you see in that ordinance talks about limiting the acceptance of manure between 9 and 4. And so we started to get a handle on bottling it up. And I mean, again, when I say enforcement, if somebody calls in, if I'm available, I'll run out. You know, our staff, Braden, who's not here tonight, he will do it. Frank Shiola, who we use for those kinds of matters is our public works vendor. He'll run out and do it. If it needs code enforcement and code enforcement is available at that time, we'll send code out. But again, we're still outgunned, outmanned, if you will. We can't, we just can't keep up with it all. And we don't have the staff on the clock for these folks that are starting to come in at the odd hours. So, we have caught some people. We know some people that are doing illegal things. The council directed us to send letters out to all the haulers and property receiving folks to let them know that pretty much a zoning in progress was declared, and that's what these ordinances are. There are two ordinances that are being promulgated. The first is dealing with the haulers, which you don't have before you. It's been to council as a first reading, and it goes to council on next Tuesday night as a second reading, and it's a freestanding ordinance. The one that's before you that relates to the receiver properties is because it deals with property and it's considered a land development code. So we're letting, and therefore that's why it needs to come before you for your approval, and then it'll follow behind the haulers, and it'll be a first and second reading. When I said we know some things, we know some things going on. There's still a lot of manure coming into the town illegally after hours. We have an idea of who they are, how they're doing it, but we still have to, monitor, catch them, all that kind of stuff. That's going on despite everything that's happening in the ordinance. But what the ordinance tries to do, it really tries to toughen up in a number of ways. As I said, it limits the delivery of manure into town between the hours of 9 and 4. The other thing it does is you cannot bring in manure from out of the town boundaries. So now what the ordinance really is regulating is those folks that are in the town that produce manure. If you have a property, you have a banana farm, you have whatever, and you want manure, you have to find somebody in the town that actually produces the manure. Like Keith has a stable, so obviously there's some manure coming from his property. He could make an arrangement with somebody, and the manure could be taken there because it's within the town boundaries. And having said that, even with that, that's what I'm saying, we're still dealing with the illegal delivery of manure into the town from other interests. So this ordinance, it's long. The town attorney tried to cover a lot of things. I'll kind of run through it quickly. One of the key things about this is you see there's a public nuisance definition, and that's key in meeting with the state attorney and talking about that, because that helps. That declaring something a nuisance is very important. It also helps us get the sheriff's office involved in assisting us with those statutes that are being violated. At the same time, it allows us, since it's property owners, to still use the code enforcement process where it's applicable and appropriate. We put in a lot of requirements in about the fact that they have to come in for the permit. They have to provide reports to us so we can track where they're getting the manure, where it's going. So we just have a little better handle on it. So we can, with our limited capabilities, provide some measure of enforcement. We do require that by the acceptance of the permit, the property owner will allow us to make an inspection of the property. We don't charge for a property owner permit. That's still, most of the charges come on the hauler side. There are some new provisions in here based upon some of the research that the town attorney and staff is doing relative to where a hauler can dump the livestock waste, which is actually what we're calling it, livestock waste as opposed to manure, and then provisions relative to the spreading. The spreading still has to occur within 72 hours. But I will tell you again, quite frankly, we don't have the staff. We go into every property and making sure this is happening. So, we do our best, but, we're still relying on folks, to help us out. And by the way, I would indicate to all you all, and I've told this to folks that call in, if you see something going on, you think it's not right, and you have a camera phone, take some shots, take some evidence, because we need all the help we can in terms of trying to make sure that we, correct this situation. And anything we can gather, through the help of anybody, we certainly welcome that. So the ordinance basically limits some of the key things. A property owner can accept a maximum of 10 loads pursuant to a permit with a maximum of 4 loads in a calendar month. That we didn't have that provision before. As I said, we talked about the fact that we put in section M, the use of livestock waste as fill in the property. That's strictly prohibited, because what we felt is some people were taking a lot of livestock waste, and we're starting to question whether that really is related to some bona fide ag purpose. Because when we met with the Solid Waste Authority, they provided us with a wealth of information from a number of state agencies which really question. There's a lot of leeway, you know, that somebody who has bona fide ag has. And sometimes they use it as a get out of jail card, but what we're trying to do is make sure that, yes, if you're a bona fide ag, yes, you know, the use of the manure is appropriate. But by the same token, don't just try to use the ag card just to make money accepting manure. And we think by cutting off the outside acceptance of manure in the town, we're kind of put an end to that. We're really helping our own folks in the town with the maneuver of, with the removal of manure with those who haven't produced on their property, and those who can actually use it for a valid purpose then can get it. And I'm trying to give you the quickie on this. There's a lot, obviously. So this ordinance is, you know, a lot of provisions in it from the town attorney.
Mark, if I could just ask
Yeah.
one question, I was
Yeah.
looking all through here for the depth that it can be spread. And you referred to VMPs and other sources outside of this document.
The interesting thing, there is this one that's provided relative to water quality and quantity, best management practices for Florida equine operations. And it does talk about, you know, manure to some extent and how things are addressed. The one thing we haven't been able to get from people, they keep saying, well, there's BMPs on how you use manure as it relates to bona fide ag operations. And I've challenged a lot of people, fine, I want to see it, show it, bring it to me. Nobody has produced it yet.
Well,
So,
see, most of what they haul in is shavings,
that's true. Yeah.
Shavings?
you know, horseback,
That horse bedding, yeah.
you know, where.
Yeah, but with waste material, not just shavings.
Well,
It's manure and
yeah,
shavings.
and the worst part of it is the ammonia in the earth.
We had staff that also attended like a seminar in Wellington one day that was put on by a couple of different agencies. And also, one thing you have to consider in the manure is sometimes horses are given a lot of drugs depending upon what they're being used for. And that can actually be in the manure, which can then in turn cause a problem. Heavy drug influence in that product. So there is a section, when you start getting to the sections S and T, it talks about the violations as it relates to Florida statutes 403, 413, you know, the littering laws and things like that. It talks about the offenses. What we try to do is we try to open this up to make sure that we have support from the sheriff's office in terms of enforcing this. T1 talks about the fact law enforcement officers are authorized to enforce this ordinance because we do need that. In fact, we're having a big meeting next week to talk about this again to try to get as much help as we can from law enforcement. And they have helped us so far. The environmental section has been great. I mean, you know, without them, they can kind of get tough and lean on them and do the things that we can't as, you know, as civilian employees. We have the town attorney further reiterated under T3, to the extent authorized by law, town administration is authorized to use the town's code enforcement process to enforce violations of this ordinance where a law enforcement officer has not otherwise issued violations on section 403, 413. Because, you know, it's pretty easy if, you know, you can use the code enforcement process if it's a property. Our concerns were especially the haulers and how you deal with them, since they are moving, you know, I mean, there are a couple of other alternate code enforcement procedures provided in statute 162. One is a citation process, but there are some hoops you have to jump through to make the citation process work. Another is notice to appear. I talked to several attorneys. The sticky point on that is now you're taking it to the courts, and sometimes the courts don't have to deal with those, what they used to consider municipal type matters. So you're taking a chance, you don't know how the judge is going to react. So it's better if we can control it by virtue of just the statutes through criminal offenses, through the code enforcement process. I would love to probably try to have a notice to appear type of situation, but, you know, it requires, you know, there are some hoops you got to jump through on that too. Although I think it's easier for a law enforcement officer to issue a notice to appear than a code enforcement officer. There has to be some notice, and it really has to be something that's getting close to being an egregious act. Now, of course, if you're violating town's code and you're bringing manure in or a livestock waste at a time when you're not supposed to, or, you know, I mean, or if you're bringing it from out of the city limits, to me, that's still being pretty egregious, I think. So, so with that, as you can see, you know, a lot of sections. Sections run all the way through from A to U. I think the town attorney has, you know, done a very good job of trying to cover all the discussions that we've had with town council. And I guess we would be looking for P&Z to offer any additional comments they have or suggestions that we will pass on to the town attorney and take forward to the town council at a first reading without after proper advertising. So with that, I'll open it up and try to answer any questions if you have.
Mark, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Is the adverse effect of manure, is this strictly environmental issues, or are there other adverse effects in having excess manure in the town?
Well,
Flies.
yeah, well, that's been one of the biggest complaints, especially when it's not dumped properly and then it's not being spread, that's been one issue. I mean, there is legitimate ag uses for manure. The problem has been that some folks who are saying they need it have really accepted what appears to be more than they really should. And, it is environmental to an extent because it can cause a lot of problems, and, the biggest one is phosphorus. That's what Wellington had to deal with. And,
Can you
Let the
elaborate on
record
that?
show that Robin Crawford is from.
The biggest problem is what?
phosphorus.
Can you elaborate?
That gets into the water supply. It was getting, but Wellington, I think in their case, it was going into the Everglades. Their discharges were going into the Everglades, and that was causing a problem, polluting it. There are a couple of other, I think, chemical reactions that are caused by the manure, but what it does is if it obviously starts to get into the canals and the groundwater, and then we have serious issues. And we're a septic tank well community, so there's some valid concern there. The amount of manure is just tremendous that was coming in. I mean, crazy amounts.
And the reason I asked that, it seemed like the town wants to put a stake on the ground when it comes to this issue. There are mere amount of issues there. I'm just trying to figure out why this issue, as opposed to other things that could be addressed.
Well, I think the amount of complaints, obviously, I appreciated the discretion the town council gave me, but when I realized that I'm looking at $86,000 of revenue that the town could use, and not something you easily dismiss real quickly.
Hire a code officer with that.
You can do a lot of things with that, right? I mean, there's no question about that.
Hire a cop.
That's right.
But, it just seemed like, we were getting the amount of complaints. I mean, and they were coming in at night when pretty much nobody's there, we can't do anything. I mean, Member Joyce kind of hit on it right there. A lot of the complaints dealt with, hey, the smell, flies. I mean, and we've never had a situation like that before, where we've been getting that kind of mass complaints. So it kind of told us, hey, we might need to look at this a little more closely and tighten up and do something.
Okay.
I'm good.
Keith, I believe you had a hand up.
I was just gonna comment on that it gets to the point, the phosphorus content of our canal water is gonna get to a point where we're not gonna be allowed to drain our canals into the C-51 because of the high phosphorus content, and that's gonna be a severe problem for the town of Waxahachie Rose if it cannot clear the canal system. And there are new federal mandates coming out here in the next 18 months of water qualities and counts, and it's got a lot of people scared.
Yeah, I went through those meetings. We were told that the town would need a drain field the size of Wellington to filter out the phosphorus nutrients.
And I would also add, just for your information, I don't know if you saw the meeting, our last meeting, we had a young lady by the name of Shelley Townsend.
Oh, yeah.
Echo Green, I think it's called, and she has her own patent for a process that I guess kind of like burns the manure, or washes it. And I guess she was looking to see if there was town council support to kind of get into some kind of private-public partnership. But I think number one, there's a couple of different issues there. We don't have land to give her, nor do I think the town wants to be in a position of being not a disposal site, but like a transfer type site for that kind of stuff. And then you would have to go through all the regulatory issues we would have to do from a land use and zoning standpoint. So a town council was interested in hearing what you had to say and all the input, but I don't think, and the bottom line was they're not really interested in getting into any kind of partnership. We don't create the problem. I mean, I think, it's created in other municipalities. But because it's been brought in,
What did Wellington ever do with their energy plant they were going to build, burn all
I don't think that's ever come to fruition.
No, I know it hasn't,
Yeah.
you know, but, it's Wellington's problem. It's
Yes,
only getting-
yes,
Only getting worse.
yes.
Have you taken this to, the, League of Cities?
No, no, we haven't tried to, any kind of dispute resolution or anything like that. We recognize, just like as you said, it's Wellington's problem. And, they need to, you know, I mean, we're gonna handle it. I think we're doing what we need to do to protect our borders, if you will. If, you know, there's excess manure coming out of Wellington, they need to figure out a way with their haulers how to take care of it.
Well, Wellington produces somewhere around 700 million cubic yards of waste per season.
Mhm. Yeah.
And one of our engineers calculated one time, because they had a guy, the same people that owned Plant Factory, have got 40 acres on D Road, south of Okeechobee, and they wanted to, see if they could use that. And one of our engineers figured out that that would be the entire 40 acres filled with manure waste would be a pile 40 feet tall,
Mhm.
over 40 acres.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of stuff.
One of the problems is there's a couple places where they can take it, but they have to go out west. And
It's all the way
for the
out.
haulers, that really takes the profit and send them
It's
out.
Okeelanta, right, is where it is?
We're going out to US Sugar.
You assure does take some, yeah.
Yeah.
I produce 20 yards a month with 15 horses. Wellington has, during season, anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 horses.
Yeah.
So you can understand the mass amount of material that's coming out.
Well, thank you, staff, for your report on this, and let's bring it back to the board. Questions? Right.
Yeah, I had some comments. Are you gonna go through it like section by section, or do you want each of us to give our comments on it?
I'll just go through the comments, since you had your hand up. We'll start with you, then we'll go to James, and then Grace.
I'm on page 3 of 12 of the ordinance. A4, and I have a question about what's organic fraction? It looks like there's a word missing, or maybe that's just a term I'm not familiar with.
I can't say for sure, I'd have to go back and check the other previous drafts.
Okay. And also it says, the definition of composting is the process which breaks it down so it can be stored and handled and used for a period of 30 to 90 days. I'm not quite sure what that means. You mean if it can't be stored or used longer than 90 days, that isn't composting, or does it mean it should be ready by 30 days, or I'm not sure what that means.
It takes 30 to 90 days to break it down.
Yeah.
So
That's
then I
right.
think-
Manure takes 30 to 90 days to break down, so it's not chemically sensitive and it can be used for fertilization processes.
Then I think the wording needs to be changed a little bit. It should say, use environmental within a period of 30, 90 days, or something like that. Is it-
Within a period, I think within a period is
Okay,
probably better.
all right. And I wanna make sure I understand, you can't bring it in from anywhere else unless it comes across state lines, and then they need a waiver to say that it came across state lines.
That-
I know why that is.
You know,
Yeah, I
okay,
know why
you got
that
the
is.
commerce clause down now.
But it can be hauled, it can be transferred within the town, from somebody in the town to somebody in the town.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And I had a generic question. Can you tell me what people normally use the manure for? What are some of the uses?
Well, when they originally, breaking it down, when they originally lessened the code or eased up the code in 2013, in addition to some of these banana farms and things like that, there was also some talk that maybe some residential users might want to use it for gardens and things like that. So that was the first thing that the council was thinking of, although I really haven't received a lot of requests like that. most of the requests have come from the actual farmers, and the banana seems to be the big one. However, there have been there's conflicting opinions on that as to how much the fertilizer helps the bananas, and we've heard that that's overstated. And, I don't have the expertise enough to tell you who's right on that issue. So, the concern was that some folks were taking it simply as an economic measure.
Mhm.
At large expanses of land, yeah, bring on the manure, that kind of thing.
This is probably somewhere else in the code, but I don't know it. There probably ought to be something in here, if it's not somewhere else, that says, just because we don't get everybody doesn't mean we can't get you. You know what I mean? The town isn't capable, doesn't have enough staff to
Mhm.
cite everybody, but just because we can't cite everybody, doesn't mean we can't cite somebody.
You mean kind of like a selective enforcement thing?
And well,
Yeah.
it just tells everybody, there will be selective enforcement only because we don't have enough resources. It's probably somewhere else in the code.
Yeah.
But if it isn't,
Right.
we might just wanna cover ourselves.
Okay.
You have let's see, it looks like, number 11, wait a minute now. A11, you have, under the definition of public nuisance, the unreasonable, unwarranted, and/or unlawful activity or use of property which causes inconvenience or damage to others. None of those can be, they're-
Mhm.
I think we need something more specific.
Mhm.
Well, that's the Black's Law Dictionary definition of public nuisance, which everybody thought was pretty darn good. So, right out of Black's
Okay,
Law.
If it's Black's Law, that's fine.
Yes,
That's right.
who am I to quarrel? Unless you want to, but that's.
No.
Well, she stayed at the Holiday Inn Express.
Yeah, I'm not fighting Black's Law. I'm on page 5 and I have a question, let me just read my notes. There's, maybe I missed it, in the definitions, under 1 at the bottom, it makes reference to a bona fide agricultural use. Is that defined somewhere, what a bona fide agricultural use is?
Yeah,
It is?
it's number 2 in the definition section.
All right, I missed it. All
It's
right.
actually called bona fide agricultural purposes.
Purpose, okay, okay. Next page on number 5. Excuse me. I put a suggestion in here, I put a question in here. How does the property owner advise the town? Do you wanna just put something in there in a manner as described by a town guideline or something? I mean, it doesn't say in here how they do that.
I was thinking of putting in at time of application. When
Which
they
is under
apply
permit.
for the permit,
Yeah, I can see that.
that they would have to tell you what it is
Right.
when they're applying for the permit. Because I was thinking the same thing you.
That would probably work, yeah.
And midway down there, it makes reference to the city's ordinances. It should be the town's ordinances, I think, shouldn't it?
Okay.
Mhm.
And I have, just to understand, the hauler and the owner both need permits. The hauler pays, the owner doesn't, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. On I, the first line, the property owner shall ensure that its hauler, should that be does not dump?
Good catch, yeah, that's right. Or it does not dump would be better than not dump.
Okay. And I had a similar type of comment under, I'm not sure, it's a sticky note.
I'm sure the town attorney would tell you, he put this together in a very rapid, so he's,
Did he
yeah,
really?
yeah.
Yeah. I have a note on the top of page 9, I'm not sure, I don't see exactly, on page 9, it says delivery records wherever, oh, here they are, under section O. I thought that was pretty specific.
Mhm.
So I thought maybe you would wanna put something in there, delivery records shall be provided to the town manager in the manner and at such times as required by him or her, or something to that effect. Rather than being so specific in the code, but that's a matter of whatever the town council wants to do on that.
Okay. One thing I will tell you, we did, we really tightened that up. At one point, there was maze and, you know, we talked to the town attorney, and I said, look, you know, we don't have a lot of time to be fooling around with folks. If they don't
Mhm.
comply, they shall lose their,
Mhm.
you know, their
Right.
approvals.
Now, another note, a property owner that violates any of the provisions of this ordinance shall have its permit revoked by the town manager. I don't see anything in here. What if the property owner's employee or somebody else does this on the property owner's property? Is there something in here that says the property owner is responsible for anything that happens on the property?
Well, I think that's the tenor in which it's written, that, you know, it's the property owner responsible ultimately no matter. Because we've already had that happen where, you know, I had one property owner said, well, we, you know, it's not our fault. He came in, he delivered, and, you know, he had a key, and I'm like, that is your fault. I said, you need to control your property. Whatever's happening on it is ultimately, it moves back to you. So, I mean, you know, you have nice excuses, but I'm not buying it.
Can I comment on that while we're on that? Where it says on here, should a person violate this ordinance on more than one occasion during a calendar year, that person shall not be granted a permit. I think that the restriction should be tied to the property, that not necessarily the person, because what if you have a property that's in more than one person's name?
I agree, that's a good point, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would think that it should say the property shall not be.
In
Any
section,
reference to PCNs on that in the ordinance for the property?
Well, you probably could, I don't see why.
I just, you know, that way,
Yeah, property control number, yeah, absolutely.
put a PCN on it.
in section T,
Mm-hmm.
I kinda thought that was $100, $250, isn't very much.
No, but we're limited, we can't, I was trying to increase it, and the attorney advised me we couldn't go any higher than that.
I know it can't
You're
go higher
limited,
than
your,
500.
the upper limit is 500, so that's how we came up with, and we did it in four, you know, 3 offenses and then all others, so that's how we kind
Well, it would be my recommendation that it start at 350,
of, okay,
400, 450, 500.
okay.
And the reason I say that is in the community where I work, we give out parking violations for contractors who block our streets and our residents can't get by, so we give them parking tickets. It's chump change to them. I mean, it's a cost of doing business to them. And so I'd be concerned that a commercial hauler might view it the same way, so that's why I say
Okay.
make it as high as we can.
All right,
Additional,
I
There
don't
is,
know why you wouldn't start at 500.
there is state statute that can be used, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Ryan's brought up on several occasions about confiscation of vehicles, because it is a second degree.
yeah, that happens, I believe that happens under the commercial, dumping laws, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
So there
It could
is-
get pretty hefty.
There are some teeth that can be used in state statutes, if
Mhm.
who so desire want to pursue that method.
Yeah, wow. I don't know if you can do the first offense at 350, you might have to do it at 250, but the
Well,
rest of them might be.
if 350 is what you want, we'll recommend it, and as your
But I mean,
recommendation, we'll
you
see.
need to check the
Yeah.
state statute, because it might say the first offense maximum 250. But if it isn't, then I would recommend.
I know when we talked about it, the attorney was, when I was trying to make him higher to begin with, he indicated that I had flexibility there, I just couldn't go past the maximum.
Yeah.
I was limited there.
And if we used our code officers, wouldn't they go before the special magistrate?
Yeah, I was
Yes.
gonna ask that.
That's correct?
So it doesn't go to the courts?
No, the code enforcement process would still go through special
Special
magistrate.
magistrate.
But if it's a police violation,
That's all, yeah.
That's right. And I have on page 11, I have a note, let me just. Seems to be right, constitutes violation of this ordinance. I have a note to myself, right at 4 and U, allow contrary to adopted zoning, so.
To allow what?
So I don't know if, and looking at it, it's kind of blocking the wording, but I think I meant it to be, nothing in this ordinance is to be construed to permit a solid waste in conflict with state and county regulations, or zoning, maybe that's probably what I meant. Or the town zoning or anything like that, is that necessary or not? Just a comment, do we want to include our own zoning regulations in there?
Well, I guess if you want to address that, it might be in conflict with town and state, or town, county,
Yeah,
and state
yeah.
regulations.
Right.
You could add the town in there, and that would probably cover everything, and that would be a zoning issue, yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Burns, do you have any comments you would like to make on this?
The only comment that I noticed, when you look at the amount for the offenses, it applies to both the hauler and the property owner, correct?
Yeah, the Holler ordinance has a very similar provision like that in there. Just sort of
So but
defines
this
that.
this is more catered toward the property owner, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want everybody to be mindful of that, and if the offense is a minute offense or something minor, that considerably, this person can be fined $350, as opposed to, it doesn't differentiate between this violation and so on. To me, the way I read it is any violation.
The hauler does have the same exact, so obviously if council is inclined to increase it as you recommended.
Well, it's any violation to this section of the
Yes,
code.
right,
So
yeah.
if they have a violation to this livestock waste, then they would be fined on their first offense, $350.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, that,
Yeah.
if, I would think there's different degree of
Violation,
violation, I guess.
Well, it's not a violation until you have like 10 cubic yards or something,
Yeah,
isn't it?
more than that.
That's
That's a
not
lot.
minor to me,
Okay.
I mean, it's just me, but,
In
Town
terms-
council is trying to be careful not to hurt town residents.
yeah, that's right. But
Well,
10 cubic
you
yards
want to
is-
discourage them from hurting those town residents who are not being mindful. Because the folks who are going to abide by this. The folks who aren't, don't care anyway.
Mhm.
So then those are the ones that you want
Yep.
to encourage to comply.
And it's one last comment, in terms of page 10, number 2, there's no way the judge is going to enforce that, 60 days. DUI is people don't get that. I mean, there's no way a judge for public nuisance sentence someone to a day in county jail. I mean, and you're talking to a former prosecutor here, so I know. So,
Well,
I mean,
maybe
you
we'll
can
get that,
have-
I know,
it's
maybe we'll get that
scary.
comment back. I know he sent the ordinances on to the state attorneys for their input. I don't know at this point in time if he's received anything back from them or not, but.
I actually think that's in Florida Statute
Standard
205, isn't it?
Standard language.
That
Yeah.
it's up to 60 days in the code enforcement language, I believe it is.
Well, I'm not saying it's wrong in putting it there, I'm just saying that
Yeah.
application of this
Right.
is, it's not gonna happen.
Right.
I'm just telling you.
Right.
That's it.
Okay.
Your turn?
Ms. Joyce?
Okay. On page 5, it talks about in number 1, it's like almost toward the bottom, it says, when the property owner certifies to the town manager that the property owner is making a good faith effort to obtain the agricultural use tax designation. How do you define good faith effort? And I would think that we'd wanna put a time frame on that.
Mhm.
If they don't receive it by a certain date, because we're giving them this permit based on that they're going to do something.
Well, Mr. Fleischman has researched this and you're the expert on this in terms of talking to the property appraiser. Do you want to share what you found out when you were,
Yeah.
as far as bona fide ag and that whole, when you remember what you identified at the Unified Land Development Code?
Yeah, you can make application fairly early. You can make application anytime during the year, but it won't go into effect until a certain time. So I would assume that if a property owner is making an application for a bona fide ag designation, that in itself is a good faith effort.
Then it should say that they provide you with a copy of the application that they made, and then come back in and provide you with documentation that it went through, that it was approved.
Can I add something to that, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
And I believe that can be a very lengthy process. Sometimes it isn't, but sometimes it can go on as long as 3 years, I've read. Because they have so much you have to do, and you have to document this, and you have to document that, and you have to do this and that. So I think if they make application, and if they're continuing on, they should be allowed to get this money. But it could be a long time, from my
Yeah.
understanding of it.
I don't think you shouldn't not do it, but you have to have some sort of evidence that they are in fact pursuing it, other than just good faith effort.
Right.
And we talked about a couple of things that Veronica said. On page 7, where letter number G, where it talks about, the hours of operation, when they can and cannot. If they don't comply with this and they get caught, I think this would be a good place to put something similar to what Veronica was saying. If you're in non-compliance, your permit is immediately revoked. So if you're non-compliant with this section, we will revoke your permit.
Yeah, I know council wants to be very strong on that, because I talked about, in one of the meetings, I mentioned about, if I have situations that occur like that, I'm gonna bring it back to council, and they said, don't bring it back, just do
Yeah.
it.
Do
And
it.
I said, okay.
On page 9, letter 11, crops should be planted as soon as possible after spreading. What if they don't? Because I remember in one of the board meetings, there was discussion where someone said, oh yes, we're gonna plant banana
Mhm.
trees, and there was 1 or 2. I mean, I'm
Right.
exaggerating somewhat,
Right.
but what if they don't? I mean, what's the remedy if?
Well, if they're not spreading it, I mean, there are several remedies, I guess you could do code enforcement through the special magistrate, which is not gonna be a quick thing. I think that's a provision that then allows me to take action.
Well,
From the standpoint
you
of
know,
revoking the permit or something.
Yeah, I would put that language in there,
Okay.
if non-compliant, and you can just be repetitive throughout the whole ordinance, your permit will be revoked, and, no new permit will be issued for 90 days or whatever, so that they know that, this is a stronger ordinance than you are used to. The only other thing that I wanted to comment is more of a formatting preference, and it goes back to page 4 and 5. Generally, you put things in order of importance when you're putting the A, B, C, and D and all that. And I thought letter F should actually come right after B.
After B,
So letter F would actually become, letter E would become C, because that should be next. If you're talking in order of how things flow, first you want to talk about what it is, and then you're telling the owner how they have to do it. And then if you go to letter F and that becomes D, you're gonna tell them what happens if you don't do it. So it's just a preference in order of process. So C would become E, D would become F, E would become C, and F would become D. And that's just a suggestion. It just seems to flow more naturally and when you're reading it, sort of like a story. That was all.
Okay. Robin?
Nope.
No.
Keith?
I've been with this since it started, and we really have worked it. I'd like to make a motion to recommend its approval.
We have a motion for approval with correction.
With the corrections and changes that the members of the board have offered.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Joyce. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
I lost my vote, correct?
Aw.
I got it.
Okay. Mr. Town Manager, please introduce the next agenda.
Okay, well, the next agenda item is going to be handled by our crack planner, Jim Fleischman. Jim, if you would.
In terms of the history of this ordinance, you probably can just read the whereas number 2 and number 3. And now one of the council members made a point that similar to agriculture, there are state statutes that preempt local controls over the regulation of firearms and ammunition use at sport, shooting, and training ranges. So, on that basis, council directed staff to take out of the code any references to gun and shooting ranges. So, that's what we did, and it's pretty simple. On page 3 of 6, under section 2015 permitted uses in the AR district, we struck shooting range indoor. And on page 4 of 6, under permitted uses in the Parks and Recreation district, we struck the words gun or. And under section 8040, which is the conditional uses, we struck all of the conditions that relate to gun ranges. And under section 95-010 on page 5, we struck the parking requirement for a gun range. And that's it. As I said, it's relatively simple, straightforward change to the code, but based on our ULDC, we need to bring all proposed changes to the P&Z. So
Okay.
staff recommends approval.
Grace, you want to start this?
I would like to, I'm not an attorney, and nor did I stay at a Holiday Inn last night, but, I understand, state statutes, and I printed out both of the state statutes that were, put, you know, in here. And I'm not sure who, was it the one of the town council members who suggested this, and the town attorney agreed?
I'm not sure if the town
Here's why
attorney agreed. He followed directions.
Yeah, here's. Okay, that's why we do not. follow the directions, but when I read the ordinance, and I have extra or the state statute, I made extra copies, the preemption, the 790.33, actually refers to the sale of ammunition, and then it lists all of the things, just as it pertains to the sale of guns and ammunitions and the transfer and the taxation and manufacturing and ownership and possession, storage and transportation thereof. And then it goes on to say, exceptions to this section are the zoning ordinance that encompass firearm businesses along with other businesses, which is our ordinance, right? Except that zoning ordinances that are designed for the purpose of restricting or prohibiting, and then it goes back into the sale, purchase, transfer, or manufacturing of firearms or ammunition as a method of blah, 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 blah. So I would recommend that we have our attorney look at this, because state statute 790.33 only applies to the sale of, and then it talks about manufacturing firearms and so forth. Then when you go into the next statute, which is 790.333, which actually talks about sports shooting and training ranges, its only discussion points pertain to environmental issues as it relates to what's left behind. So I think that there's been a misinterpretation of this statute by the board member, and I would be concerned, what are the unintended consequences of removing this from our code? Because I don't think we're in violation of this state statute as it's written. I think there was a misinterpretation, and I would request that, you know, the town attorney actually look at this and make a determination if you know, that's possible to request that, or however that's done. So I'm not sure that there's a need to actually change this. And also, the first whereas, that you just transpose the numbers.
Obviously, if that's, you know, the board's recommendation, we'll pass it on.
Well, just, you know, in the AGO statement, you know, on the second page, thus, a zoning ordinance prohibiting any commercial business activity within an area zoned for residential use would not appear to be inconsistent with the intent of section 7903.33 Florida statutes. So, you know, that's why I think we're not stepping on anybody's toes here, you know, is that, you know, we say the appropriate place for a gun range or gun things is in a commercial low area. You know, and we probably need to go one step further and say that gun ranges, as such, are not allowed in a residential area. Because that's what we're, you know, up against here, because, you know, it's talking about our neighbor who wants to continue being a gun dealer.
I think that's different, though, from what we're talking about here.
I think it is too.
Yeah, yes, okay. I'm not sure that this is a necessary amendment based on the justification that the state statute says we have to do it, because the state statute is only referring to the preemption of a municipality as it relates to the sale of ... And Jim, I have copies, like I said, I brought some extra for anyone who's interested in taking a look at it.
So your recommendation would be?
I don't, you know, again, like I said, you know, I'm not an attorney, but I would table it until we actually,
Have the attorney take a look at the.
Yeah,
Yeah,
take a look at the statute to see if in fact this is a change that needs to be done.
Because the AGO opinion really goes back and forth on municipalities trying to take away gun rights
Right,
through zoning,
right,
which you can't do.
correct.
And that's why this paragraph, the paragraph starts on page 4, second paragraph from the top, or the first paragraph on the page. Clearly, a municipality's attempt to regulate firearms is null and void
What are you looking at?
here on the AGO.
Oh, okay, which we don't have a copy of.
Yeah,
We do?
Well, got sent out.
It was in a recent email.
And Janet-
Oh, okay, my printer broke, so.
So Florida statutes recognize the local zoning ordinance, which affect other businesses in the same way are allowed. The statute is equally clear in prohibiting zoning ordinances designed to restrict or prohibit the sale, purchase, transfer, or manufacture of firearms or ammunition as a method of regulating firearms or ammunition. So you can't do that.
Right.
But thus, a zoning ordinance prohibiting any commercial business activity within an area zoned for residential use would not appear to be inconsistent with the intent of section 790.33 Florida statute.
Right.
So, we're not doing anything wrong. We're saying commercial low, fine, that's where it should be.
And even if we change this on the recommendation of the council member, who I don't know who it was, it's not gonna help that gentleman.
Oh, I don't think that was the case.
No,
I don't think
that
that
was
was it.
Okay,
They're kind of like, yeah, they're different issues.
okay.
Now, what was the, excuse me, Bernie, let me just ask one question. What was the ATF's problem with his operation? I'm trying to recall this.
Yeah, the ATF's concerned, because you may remember, we originally permitted him as a residential enterprise. And the residential enterprise had, list of 10 criteria in order to comply with the residential enterprise. When they reviewed it, they saw that one of our requirements was no foot traffic
Mhm.
to the property. And really, their situation was more or less like, well, he's okay in our eyes, but he has to be okay with local regulations. And because he's accepting foot traffic and he's not complying with your code, therefore we have a problem.
Mhm.
And that was their position.
Okay.
And then
So,
that's what led to the amendment to wanting to, add foot traffic in the residential enterprise, which I think everybody thought was not a good idea.
yeah. And we went through all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And then you guys did come up with some.
We did.
Grueling.
That
Oh,
was,
I mean, that was a long motion, but it was a good motion.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well,
Ron
shall we,
Felton.
oh, I'm sorry, Ron.
That's similar
I
to.
need a mirror.
I know, that's similar to liquor licenses. You gotta be in conformance with the local zoning before you'll issue a liquor license. But I have one thing. Our code prescribes what's allowable in residential districts, and gun ranges are not included, are they?
Let me see.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm pretty sure they're not.
I don't think we put that in.
Actually,
Yeah,
we go,
Yeah, that's right, it's just a commercial law.
Right. I agree with what's been said. I think that section of the state statute is very clear. The exception is, if you're regulating all businesses, and they're a business just like any other business, you can regulate.
mhm.
And so, I was kind of curious as to which councilman it was.
Councilman Goldsmith.
And just out of curiosity, why didn't the council ask the town attorney for some input before they?
I believe the town attorney mentioned something previously, and I'm not sure what issue it was, if it was the client issue or not, but I remember in one of our council meetings, Councilman Goldsmith then said, well, you indicated that, so we should take that out, and they were having like an agreement. So,
Well, I agree with Grace. I think we should not do this now, but if the attorney comes back and says, yeah, we better do something, then I would like it to come back to us for further discussion. if that's,
If you want to table it, you know.
Well, table with the instruction to staff to, you know, get
Right,
clarification.
right,
from
oh, absolutely,
Tom
yeah,
Chair.
absolutely.
I would
Do
make
we
that
need a
motion.
motion on that table?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I would make that motion.
Okay, so second on that?
Second.
Second from Keith. All those in favor, discussion, any more discussion on this? You sure? You didn't have something burning?
Could we do a private shooting range?
There's one every weekend, all you gotta do is listen.
Yeah.
All you gotta do is listen.
That and the drop.
And I'm
Keep your
not
dogs
gonna go
indoors.
get a compressor because, is that what they call those things?
Did we vote?
A silencer?
Did we vote?
Not yet.
Okay.
All those in favor of tabling this motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign, motion's passed unanimously. Staff? Are we through?
I don't have anything for that,
I think we're through.
unless you have any questions on anything.
Okay, was there any comments from the board that you would like to have on the record? Hearing none? Keith, did you?
No comment.
Okay. Then this meeting with without objection is adjourned. All right, we're adjourned.
Good job.
Yeah.
Mhm. You're welcome.
How did you get two meetings on the same day, the 23rd?